So you may not realize, but there is an important connection between the FAA authorization bill that Congress is trying to pass right now and the history of organized labor in our country. And it's actually really interesting. The FAA bill, of course, is a must-pass bill that comes along every 5 years and has a bunch of provisions and funding in it for everything having to do with aviation in our country. The one they're working on right now has a provision in it that is really important to all of our safety. And that provision basically provides a whole bunch of funding to hire and train new air traffic controllers. Now, how does this connect to organized labor? I'm going to tell you. We're short, very, very painfully short on air traffic controllers. As a matter of fact, we are about 3,000 short across the country, which may not sound like a huge amount, but we're supposed to have 14,000. So we are about a quarter of our number short. And this has led to an almost daily occurrence of near collisions in airspace and on runways. And you can Google this. It is a well-known phenomenon. It's happening all the time. And it's only a matter of time until there is a horrific accident because we simply don't have enough air traffic controllers. And the ones we do have are often working, I kid you not, 60-hour weeks. 60 hours. Now let's talk about why they're so short-staffed. It was a couple of things, one of them being COVID, which was very hard on the air traffic control industry. A lot of people retired early. But the big thing that happened all the way back in 1981. And it coincides, not coincidentally, with the beginning of the decimation of the American organized labor movement, because the two things were totally entwined. What happened was that the Air Traffic Controllers Union went on strike that year. They're called PATCO. And because they were federal employees, they technically weren't allowed to go on strike, but they did because they really, really were in need of better pay, better working conditions, and so they went on strike, 12,000 of them. Ronald Reagan, the newly elected Republican president at the time, decided to do something that no one before him had done because he was, in essence, horribly anti-union, as all Republicans are, but he was the first one to really show them how it's done. He gave them 48 hours to either return from their strike or be fired. The workers thought he was probably bluffing because they figured, well, where will you get air traffic controllers if we're not here? And so they held out. They held it in solidarity together. And when the 48-hour mark was up, Reagan fired all of them. This was a stunning development. It was horrific. People were shocked. Nobody thought he was going to do it. The strikers were devastated, of course, as they all lost their livelihoods. And the United States was really kind of like, what the hell is going to happen? We just lost all of our air traffic controllers. But the Reagan people scrambled. They got a bunch of military people to come in. They brought people back from retirement. And they were able to keep the damage to somewhat of a minimum. Flights were definitely impacted, but not quite as badly as people feared. And because of this, other people in other industries watched what Reagan had done. And they said, well, look at that. All you need to do is stand up to these strikers. All you need to do is break the strike. You fire them. There's nothing they can do about it. And so from that point forward, the PATCO model, Ronald Reagan's firing of 12,000 air traffic controllers, became a model that more and more corporations used. They simply fired striking workers and used scabs. And in fact, it almost came to seem like they wanted workers to go on strike so they could fire them and get non-unionized workers who couldn't negotiate for better conditions. And in the next 40 years, as Republican administrations followed suit and attacked unions and did the same kinds of things that Reagan had done, not only was our air traffic control force irrevocably diminished, but across industries we saw unions take an absolute beating. And it has become part of the Republican platform to undermine unions in every way they can. The reason we still have an air traffic control system that is depleted is because Reagan and his people hired so many new air traffic controllers at the same time that it created sort of a bubble. So as those people retire every 20 years, we see a massive drop in how many air traffic controllers we have, and we're experiencing such a bubble right now. We are still endangered by bad Republican policies from 40 years ago, but Democrats are trying to fix it, in part with the funding in this FAA authorization bill, but also by bolstering unions back up. Do you know that last year we saw a 280% increase in strike activity? That is because of a Democratic president who is pro-union and supports labor organizing. And when we look at this entire picture together, we can see that once again, Republican policies are short-sighted, they're destructive, they're cruel, and they end up harming the country long term in ways that we can only begin to imagine at the time. One party is bent on making more money for themselves and screwing the working American, and the other party is bent on supporting organized labor because they realize that both in the short term, that's a great investment, and in the long term. Vote accordingly.